All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to day two of the urban game. So, yesterday you set up your village, 1700. Your life was slow. You lived kind of a hand to mouth existence. You grew everything you eat. If you wanted chicken, you need to kill the chicken, pluck the chicken, boil the chicken, just so that you can have something to eat. So, everything was really slow. Products took a long time to create. Uh, And really, life had been like that for thousands of years, give or take, depending on who was in power. Human history had kind of taken a really, really slow course. But what you're going to see here as 1700 kind of begins and we get into the 1740s and 50s, life is going to start to change. So make sure you have your village in front of you. Make sure you have a pencil and an eraser. Okay, if you have not finished day one of the urban game, please go back and do that first because it's going to be hard to get caught up with. So make sure that you're finished with day one, start with day two, and then once you're done with day two, you can do day three. Okay. All right, so round one. It is now 1745. England's geography is unique. England is an island. We often talk about England as this giant country because we talk about it so much, but really it's a small place. But it's unique in the world in that it's a small country surrounded by ocean, but it's got lots of rivers running through the entire country, so it's very livable because you need water to survive. And so the English countryside is going to be really habitable for people. And you, as a young capitalist, decide that you want to make some money. Okay, so a capitalist means somebody who's willing to invest their money to make money. And so one of the major issues that you had in your village was that your roads were always difficult to pass through. Remember, everything was dirt, and England, it rains all the time, and so dirt roads are really hard to pass when it's raining outside. So, as a business person, you know that people need more reliable ways to trade. So, what you're going to do is you're going to construct a canal. So, a river and a canal are a little bit different. A river is natural. Okay, rivers can be wide, they can be narrow, they can be deep, they can be shallow, they can be rocky, they can be sandy. And so they can be helpful for transportation, and they often are. But what a canal is a guaranteed way to ship stuff. It's a man made river, it's usually narrow and deep, and it's specifically designed for traveling. So, for taking goods from one part of the country to another. These canals will eventually flow out into the river or out into the ocean, and they're usually connected to a river at some point, and that's how they get their water. So, you decide you want to build a canal. The reason you can make money doing this is because you're going to charge people a fee to trade between. And you know that you can get away with doing that because I would pay a fee if something was going to take me 3 days versus taking 1 day. I'm going to pay the extra little fee to save myself a few days. And so over the course of a year, you're going to yield a 100% annual return, and that's going to happen for 30 years. That means that every single year that your canal exists, you're going to make at least as much money as it cost you to make it. So if it costs $30,000 to make, every year for 30 years, you're going to make $30,000. So eventually it becomes what we call passive income, that you've invested your money and now all it's doing is making money. And so again, because this transportation revolution makes it possible to trade between villages much, much easier and much faster, the goods actually become cheaper because you have to kind of tack your time on to however much the good that you produced costs. So if it took you 10 days to make this piece of cloth, and then it's going to take you another 5 days to get it to the village, you charge for your time and the cost of the product. So because it takes a little bit less time, cost of the goods is going to go down. And coal is now going to be able to be transported from the mine to the towns for half the price that it was for wagons. Remember, they need coal to stay warm. So for round one, what I want you to do is I want you to construct a canal. So this canal needs to run parallel to the river. So it doesn't have to be right next to the river, but it does need to be parallel to it, running the same direction, because the river is going to be its resource for water. And because you're going to make a tidy profit, what I'd like you to do is I want you to build yourself a special house. So build yourself one nice home anywhere on the map that you'd like. Go ahead and pause the video to do that. And once you've constructed your canal and you've constructed your nice home, then go ahead and come back to the video and continue with the game. Round 2. It is 1750. For a variety of reasons, soap, sanitation, diet, there's a population explosion in England. And there also is kind of a weather change. There's a lot of these kind of like terrestrial factors that make this huge explosion in population. Also, the bubonic plague kind of disappears. It's been something that's been cursing your village for centuries, killing off people in mass amounts. And one of the reasons that it has virtually gone away is because you have found a new use for those canals. You see, people at this time used to, and they still did for a long time, but before indoor plumbing, they had these things called chamber pots. And basically it was this like sometimes fancy, sometimes just a bucket that you would have in your house, and you'd lay like a towel over it, and everybody would go to the bathroom in this bucket. So that's where your excrement would go. Okay. Once the bucket was full, they didn't like go and bury it. They threw it out in the street. And here's the problem with that. Other than it being disgusting, human fecal matter, the reason that we excrete those things is because it has bacteria in it. One of the many reasons, it has bacteria in it that's incredibly dangerous to us, one particularly being E. coli. And so people were constantly dying of these preventable bacteria infections because they were always around their excrement. So they were always walking around in poop. And that type of bacteria can actually transmit through your skin. And so it was very unhealthy. So when we're talking about those death rates, there's a lot of things that play into it, like, never washing your hands, living with your animals, walking through your sewage. And so that canal that you built, now people are going to say, hey, instead of throwing my chamber pot into the street, I'm going to throw it into the canal. And that canal is going to take it away and take it out to the ocean eventually, which is generally great thinking. That's kind of the beginnings of indoor plumbing. The problem is that the canal is an open air thing. So you basically have a sewer running through your town now, and you guys have all smelled that. You've all smelled when they take the cap off of the sewer and the whole school stinks. You've smelled it. It does not smell good, and that is treated. This stuff is untreated, just flowing through the river. But it is a little bit safer than what they were doing. So add 5 houses, because now you have a population explosion. So again, go ahead and pause the video. And once you've built your 5 houses, you can build them wherever you want. Just remember to kind of try to keep all of your houses, other than the nice houses, about the same size. So again, go ahead and pause the video, build 5 houses wherever you'd like to, and then come back to the video to continue. It is now round 3. It's 1760, so not very much time has passed. And now that there are more people in your village, they need a bit more food and goods to meet the needs of the new inhabitants. Coincidentally, though, a lot of things are going to be happening at the same time. You're going to have a lot of other things happening in 1760, particularly the invention of machines for farming. You see, up to this point, pretty much everything in farming had been done by hand. You might have had what we call beasts of burden. These are animals that are going to make farming a little bit easier, but pretty much everything is done by hand in farming. So tilling up the land, planting the seed, excavating the seed, all of that is all happening by human labor. And so you have the invention of these machines that are really going to make this whole process not only faster, but more efficient. And so one of them is going to be the seed drill. And basically it's this machine that pokes holes in the ground and drops seeds at the same time and evenly spaces out those seeds. and drops them kind of at the perfect depth in the ground. You see, kind of the method was to throw seeds out and hope they grew up to this point. Some areas more advanced than others. And then also the Holstron cultivator. So this basically was a machine that the horse or the cow drug behind them, and it actually tilled up the dirt. Because if you've ever done any gardening or farming, you've got to make sure that the ground is soft. So you don't want to like try to plant something in hard dirt because it's going to be really hard for that seed to grow. And on top of that, they're going to start experimenting with new, more productive farming practices like crop rotation. So do your best to visualize, because you can't see my hand motions, that you've got a square, and that square is divided into 4 pieces. Okay. Basically what crop rotation means is that we're going to grow watermelon in one square, we're going to grow cotton in one square, and we're going to grow tobacco in one of the squares. And then that 4th square, we're going to leave empty. Okay. Now, the thinking behind this is that you're trying to revive nutrients in the ground. And so every year, you will rotate those crops. And so, like where you were growing the cotton might be empty next year, and it might grow watermelon next year. Because if you change the crops around, you can keep nutrients in the ground. And that's an old method. It had been used in Asian countries and Southeast Asian countries and in Africa and with indigenous peoples in the Americas for millennia, but Europeans finally figured it out. They're also going to start using fertilizers, and they're going to have new livestock breeding techniques. So they're going to go from having 1 or 2 cows to having like whole herds of cows. So you're going to have a ton more production. So unfortunately, there's a problem. Remember, there's 2 types of landowners. Well, really 3 types of farmers at this point. You have the poor farmer who grows their food on the commons. Remember, that's land provided by the government that all people of the village can use to grow food. Then you have people who own small tracts of land. So it's going to be people who own like 10 acres. So it's enough to feed themselves to maybe make a little bit of money, but it's not like a big like industrial farm. And then you have those aristocrats that own big chunks of land. And so the problem is that those people who own like 10 acres, they don't make enough money off of their farm to afford this expensive equipment for their land. And so they can't compete with the big farmers. And so they start to pressure Parliament to say, hey, we want to buy more land. And so are the big rich people. We want to buy more land. We want to buy more land. Problem is, England's a small country. So where's the land going to come from? So they're going to sell off the commons, where the poor people feed themselves, in the Enclosure Acts. This means that landowners can buy piece of the commons from the government. Okay? And the more money you have, the more likely you are to get it. So what I want you to do, and again, pause the video to finish this, I want you to erase half of your commons. So you've got a section on your map that is the commons. I want you to cut that in half and erase the other half. And then in its place, I want you to build one more nice house. So think of this like a McMansion, some fancy kind of mansion manor type house. Okay? Take as much time as you need to complete that step. Pause the video once you're ready. Go ahead and move forward. Round 4. It is now 1773. So we're getting close to the American Revolution, but still not quite. So think like American colonial times. A man named Richard Arkwright invents a new machine that can spin and weave cloth 100 times faster than can be done by hand in a farm or cottage. So the farm cottage system is the putting out system. And basically, poor people had 2 ways of making money. They would raise food on the commons, and they would make fabric. Making fabric took a long time. You had to shear the cows, then you had to sit down at the spinning wheel and spin the thread out. And then once you spun all the thread out, then you had to use a loom to like hand create fabric. And so it took a really long time. But now you have this machine that can do that 100 times faster. So let's just assume that making a bolt of cloth would take, from start to finish, from sheep to sheep to fabric would take a peasant woman 100 hours, that means that this machine can do it in 1 hour. And so that is going to put an enormous number of poor women in particular out of work. He's going to call his machine the water frame because the principal source of power is going to be water. And as a result, the first factories for producing cotton cloth is going to be built using that water power. So you guys have seen, if you look up in the corner, you see that wheel spinning and there's like water flowing through it. You guys have seen those images before. You've seen them like in fairy tales. And what you're seeing there is something called a mill. So mills originally, so they used the power of the river to spin belts within the building to power machines. And what mills were used for before this point, and those had been around for a long time, was to grind grain. So there would be a belt that's spinning a giant stone over the top of grain so that people can get flour and make bread. Now we're using that same idea, but we're using it to power a lot more machines. So what I'd like you to do in this round is I want you to add a factory. It's a cotton factory, and it has to be placed on the riverbank. Remember that it's powered by water. So it can't be canal water because canal water is slow. Remember, it's designed for travel, for easy travel. So it's very slow water. So you're going to need to be on the river. So build a factory. Don't add any smoke. Once you've built your factory on the riverfront, go ahead and come back. But for now, pause the video so you can do that. All right, it's now 1774, and workers are going to be needed for this new factory. Now, some of the surrounding villages who don't have a river flowing through have a bunch of people, particularly women, who can't compete with the spinning and weaving of cloth in the factory, and now they have no way to make money. So they're going to start to flood into your village to find work, because at the end of the day, everybody's got to eat. So, add 5 houses, 1 church, 1 pub, 1 store. You can draw additional roads to connect things. I encourage you to build as many roads as you feel like you might need. And add 1 additional bridge. So 1 bridge across the river. Now, one thing I feel like I need to say that I'm not sure that I already mentioned is your canal. Make sure that you build bridges if you drew your canal through a road. So every time you cross the canal, make sure you draw a little bridge. But if you're going to cross, I only want you to cross the river twice total. So once earlier and this time. Okay. If you find at any point that you need to erase trees to fit in your new drawings, go for it. That's fine. Trees can be erased at any point throughout the rounds, but don't erase the buildings if you can avoid it. If you must erase a building, you need to make sure that you replace it. But just know every time you tear down a house, you're tearing down someone's life. So avoid it if you can. So go ahead and pause the video so that you can finish this round. Play the video when you're ready to go. All right, round 6, the profits made from the first textile factory. Textile is just fabric, fabric and thread. The profits were enormous. The guy who invents this machine is going to be the first millionaire. Now, it's not the first person to ever make $1 million, but it's the first person to ever make $1 million without being born into it. So this is somebody who made his own money. So he's the first millionaire, and the father of the factory. And as a result, because there's money to be made, more people are going to get in the business. So new factories are going to be built in our communities. Early owners of these factories called themselves capitalists. And this is a new business model. Capitalism has been around for a long time, but to be a capitalist means you, as the owner of the business, own the building, own the stuff inside the building, own the machines. And rather than sharing ownership of the business with your workers, which a lot of the time was the case in most places, they had apprentices and partners who they shared the profits of business with. How capitalists made money is they said, okay, we're not going to give them a share of the profits. we're just going to give them a fixed wage. So we're going to pay them $2 an hour. And then all the other profits I keep for myself. To us, that's like normal. We've lived in a capitalist system for such a long time that we don't even recognize that hasn't always been the case. But basically, if I pay you $15 an hour and my business makes $100 an hour, you still get 15 no matter how much I make, and I keep the rest. And again, that's really good for the capitalist, not so good for the worker. Okay, so I want you to add 5 more factories. Remember, there are no smoke on these factories, and they have to be on the river. So where there is money to be made, there are people ready to make the money. So you've got 5 more factories going into your town. They need to be on the riverfront. Again, pause the video, finish your 5 factories, and come back. Round 7. It is now 1780, and unemployed workers from the surrounding area flood into your community looking for work. Although wages are very low, they still look attractive to starving families. Housing is in great demand. The wages are crap in these factories, and they know it. The capitalists know it because they can. They're taking advantage of people who are starving, and they want to make as much profit as possible so they can build a new factory and have as much profit as possible, which again makes sense. I'm not knocking the capitalist, but there was nobody regulating them. Absolute power corrupts, absolutely. There's nobody saying, hey, you need to pay them a fair wage. On average, they were making about $2 an hour in today's money. So they're not making a lot of money. Most of the families to go to work, including the children, just to survive, and they still can't afford housing. And so for the first time, you're going to see this new type of housing constructed called a tenement. So a tenement is actually a familiar type of housing to us. We just call it something different, but it's where dozens of families are going to reside under one roof. So this would be like the great-great-granddaddy of the apartment. So these are going to be buildings with as many rooms as they could fit into them to squeeze as many families into them as possible. They were built as cheaply as humanly possible and often resulted in major safety issues because of how quickly and cheaply they were built. So I want you to add 5 tenements. You can kind of look at these images. You see that one room in the corner. That's really what a tenement looks like. Like, it's not an apartment in the way that we think of it. It's like a tiny little room. There were no fire escapes. A lot of the rooms didn't have windows. They had really poor ventilation. It was often more like living in a closet than living in an apartment. So I want you to build 5 tenement buildings. Now, remember that they probably should be close to the factory because that's where these people are working and living. Okay, so pause the video, build your tenements, come back when you're ready. Round 8. It is now 1780. More workers need to live, eat, shop, drink, and worship. So they need those social support services to go along with the demand. So now that you have all these new people moving into town with the tenements and the factories, they need to have places to go and things to do. So I want you to add a church, a store, a pub, and a school. Schools are only available to those families who are wealthy enough to send their kids to school, boys only, usually. School was not provided. School is not a right. School was only available for those who could afford it. It was not provided by the government. So you imagine if you've got parents working in factories, you've got kids running around amok in the street. So add 1 church, 1 store, 1 pub, and 1 school. Be conscientious where you put those things. Pause the video, and when you're ready to come back, come back. Don't get frustrated. This is the point where people start to get frustrated. Just do the best that you can. Okay, round 9. It's now 1782. Workers are working long, hard hours in factories. So their average day begins at 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. So that is 15 hours. You will have a 30-minute break for lunch if you're lucky. And so you have no bathroom breaks, so you're not allowed to stop to use the restroom. So a lot of the time people are kind of excrementing on themselves. Now that's different from case to case in factories, but for the most part, they were not provided bathroom breaks. So they're on their feet for 15 hours. They're working with really dangerous machines. There's no safety precautions. It's very loud and dark and dangerous. And so after work, they're exhausted. They made a whole whopping $2 that day, or $2 an hour. So they made $30 that day. And they just need some relaxation. They just need to be able to separate from their life. And so you start to see drug use go up, particularly alcohol. Alcohol is going to be the primary drug of choice during this time period, and it's going to be consumed in record amounts. Again, this isn't to rationalize it, but you have to think about these people coming out of villages, okay, where all they do is work outside and work with animals. They work really hard, but open air, very simple life. And then they come into the city and this is the life that they're living. Imagine the stress and anxiety and kind of overwhelming darkness that you would feel being trapped in a building for 15 hours a day in a dark, dangerous setting, 7 days a week, 363 days a year, because you'd get Easter and Christmas off. That people just want to escape. They want to escape their life. So I want you to take a second and add 2 more pubs. Pause the video, come back when you got your pubs drawn in. Okay, round 10. It is now 1783, and workers are barely going to eke out a marginal existence. There's never enough money to save, and some workers are going to go into debt because if you're only making $30 a day, how are you going to pay rent? How are you going to feed yourself? And so you end up owing people money even though you're working 15 hours a day, 363 days a year. Few, if any, could afford to send their children to school. However, there are some families that are living quite comfortably, if not luxuriously. And these are going to be the people who own large tracts of land because they're making lots of money selling food, and people who own factories. And so you're going to see all of these nice houses built in the countryside, lavishly furnished with art and curtains. And we refer to these people as the new rich or nuevo riche, or what I like to call new money. Okay? And then you have 2 groups of rich people now. You have the new money, which are the people who made their money, and they're kind of looked down upon by what I refer to as the old money. So this is the aristocratic rich. The aristocratic rich are kind of hoity-toity, snooty, have their nose up in the air because they come from an aristocratic tradition, and often they look at these factory owners and people who've made money as lower class. So there's a tension there. All right, so I'd like you to go ahead and pause the video and add 2 more special homes. So again, these homes should be bigger, more like mansions, because these people are very wealthy. When you're ready, come back so you can move on. Actually, you know what? We're in round 10, so this will be the last round for day 2. Okay, so once you're done, you don't need to take any pictures. You don't need to do a reflection. We're just doing this today. So round 10 is your last stop. If you need more help or have any questions, let me know.